The war had finally ended, but the desert still burned with smoke and silence. Human soldier Captain Raynor walked carefully between the ruins of broken machines and lifeless bodies. The alien planet had seen too much blood, and now it was quiet, too quiet. His boots sank into the dust as he searched for any signs of life. That's when he heard a weak sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. He raised his rifle and followed the noise, his eyes sharp, heart steady, behind a half-destroyed armored vehicle. He saw her, an alien warrior slumped against the metal, her breathing shallow, armor cracked, blood on her face. She opened her eyes and stared at him. They were glowing violet bright, sharp, proud, even in pain. Raynor stepped closer, keeping his weapon pointed at her chest, but instead of fighting, she raised her hand slowly. Trembling, "Don't kill me, human," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Raynor didn't lower his weapon. "You were trying to kill us just yesterday," he said. She coughed, her body shaking. "I had to. I didn't want to." He looked at her. This was the enemy, the elite warrior of the alien forces. Her nameplate was barely readable, but he caught the letters. Kareth. He had heard the name before, a commander known for never surrendering. Yet here she was on her knees, bleeding and begging, "I'll warm your bed," she said suddenly, her voice trembling with shame and fear. Raynor blinked, surprised. "What did you say? I'll be useful? I'll do anything. Just don't kill me." It was not the kind of surrender he expected. She didn't fight, didn't resist. Instead, she dropped her blade and lowered her head. There was no trick in her eyes, only raw survival. He could have ended her with one shot, but something about her stopped him. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg like a coward, but like someone who had already lost everything. Maybe it was the way her voice cracked when she said please. Raynor hesitated, and in war, hesitation could mean death, still. He pressed the emergency call on his wristband. "Command. I've got a live alien female wounded," he said. "She's one of the commanders, I think," Command replied. "Secure her if you can. If not, eliminate." Raynor looked down at Kareth again. She was barely holding on to consciousness. He saw the burn marks on her arms, the dried blood. The bruises. This wasn't a trap. She was truly defeated. He holstered his gun and pulled out his cuffs. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't resist. "You're my prisoner now," he said, snapping the cuffs around her wrists. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. As he helped her stand, she stumbled, and he caught her by the arm. Her skin was cold to the touch, her body too. Light, she hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. Raynor carried her to his transport. Laying her gently in the back seat, she didn't speak again. Her energy had run out. He sat in the front. Staring at her through the mirror, he wondered why. She had said those words, "I'll warm your bed." Was it a lie, a tactic, or something else? At the base, other soldiers stared in disbelief as Raynor carried the enemy through the gates. "Are you out of your mind?" One of them asked. "She's dangerous," said another. Raynor said nothing. He brought her to the med bay and stayed. While they patched her wounds, she never once looked at the others, only at him. And when the doctors left the room, she turned her head slowly and said, "You could have let me die, but you didn't." Raynor crossed his arms. "Why did you say that to me?" She looked at the ceiling and replied, "Because I thought that was the only way to stay alive." A pause. "But now I'm not sure if I regret saying it." Raynor didn't reply. He left the room in silence. But his mind was full of questions. Who was this alien warrior really? What secrets did she carry behind those eyes? Why did a small part of him not want to let her go? The night was cold on the edge of the human base. Captain Raynor stood near the gates, staring into the distant sky where smoke still rose. From the battleground, he couldn't sleep, not with the alien warrior in the medical bay. Kareth, the enemy commander who had once led attacks against his people, was now resting under his protection. No one could understand why he didn't kill her, not even Raynor himself. Inside the base, whispers spread quickly. Why is she still alive? She's manipulating him. Raynor's lost his mind. But Raynor didn't care about their words. He had looked into Kareth's eyes. What he saw wasn't a monster. It was something much worse, a warrior who had lost her purpose, her home, and her will to fight. Late that night, Raynor returned to the medical bay. The room was dim, lit only by the blinking monitors. Karath was awake, staring at the ceiling. Her silver hair loose around her bruised face. She turned her head slowly as he entered. "You came back," she said quietly. He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down. Arms crossed. "You never answered me," he said. "Why did you say you'd warm my bed?" She closed her eyes for a long second before answering. "In my culture, when we surrender, we offer what's most valuable." To show we accept defeat completely, Rayner frowned. "That sounds like slavery." Karth gave a bitter smile. "We never had the luxury of freedom." Silence sat between them for a while. Then she asked something unexpected. "Are you going to hand me over to the military council?" Rayner paused. "That depends. On what?" "On whether you're still a threat." She slowly sat up, wincing with pain. "I don't want to fight anymore," she said. "I was born into war, trained to obey, to kill, but no one ever asked me what I wanted." Rayner studied her face. No lies, no tricks, just tired truth. "What do you want?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Peace." Rayner leaned forward. "Peace comes with a price." She looked into his eyes and replied, "Then tell me the cost." It was a strange offer, an alien warrior. Once his enemy, now asking. "Him for a deal in the quiet of night," he said. "You'll work for us. Not as a soldier, but as a guide. You know your people's tactics. Their hidden routes, their weapons. In return, you'll stay here, under my watch." She narrowed, her eyes suspicious. "Why would you trust me with such a task?" "I don't," he said honestly, "but something tells me you're tired of being a weapon." Kareth took a deep breath. "If I say yes, they'll call me a traitor." He nodded. "And if you say no, they'll kill you anyway." She let out a soft laugh. "Then I guess I don't have much choice." Rayner stood up. "It's not about choice anymore. It's about survival." The next morning, Karath was moved from the medical bay to a private room. Soldiers stared, whispered, and some even shouted. But Rayner didn't flinch. He assigned 2 guards, but gave her access to meals, clothing, and basic comforts. Karath never complained. She kept quiet, observing everything like a hunter waiting in silence. One day she knocked on Rayner's office door. When he opened, she stood in a simple uniform, cleaner and stronger now. "I've been watching the base's security," she said. "There are blind spots in your patrol routes." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to help now?" She answered, "You gave me a second chance. Let me earn it." They began working together in the shadows. She would analyze reports, mark threats, warn him about patterns no one else noticed. Rayner began to realize something strange. She wasn't doing this to gain freedom or to escape. She was doing it because she wanted to stay. One night, during another power outage, the base went dark. Rayner lit a small lamp in his office. Kareth, sitting across the desk from him. The light flickered across her face, showing the faint lines of old scars. In New Beginnings, she looked at him and asked, "Do humans really believe in forgiveness?" Rayner replied, "Some do. And you?" "I believe in actions, not words." Kareth nodded slowly, then stood. She walked to the door, paused, and turned back. "I'm still scared, Rayner," she said. He looked at her with calm eyes. "Good," he said. "It means you still feel." She gave a soft nod and disappeared into the hallway. And Rayner, left alone in the flickering light, finally allowed himself to wonder, had he made a mistake? Or had he just begun something that would change them both forever? Days passed slowly inside the human base, but for Kareth, every moment felt like a battle. It's not against soldiers or weapons, but against her own memories. She had survived 1,000 wars, worn 1,000 armors, but never once had she taken them off for peace. Now she walked freely unarmed, unchained, and strangely. Afraid, Captain Rayner watched her from a distance. She moved like a ghost, silent. Alert, always calculating, she ate alone, trained alone, even breathed like she didn't want to disturb the air. And yet something in her had changed. She was no longer just surviving, she was searching for something. Even if she didn't know what. One evening, Rayner saw her in the base's old training room, alone under dim lights. She practiced slow combat forms with her eyes closed, Not to attack, but to remember. Her movements were graceful but heavy. Like each step pulled up a memory she couldn't forget. He didn't interrupt. Just stood in the doorway and watched, until suddenly she collapsed to her knees, trembling. Raynor rushed over. "Are you hurt?" Kareth didn't look up. "No," she whispered, "just remembering." She stood up quickly, brushing past him, but he grabbed her wrist gently. "You don't have to carry all of it alone." Her eyes met his and something cracked inside them. "I do," she said, "because if I let go, there'll be nothing left of me that night." She didn't return to her room. Raynor found her sitting near the outer wall, under the night sky. She looked up at the stars, as if they were old friends. That had betrayed her. He sat beside her in silence, and after a long pause, she finally spoke. "When I was young, they placed metal into my bones to make me faster, stronger, more obedient. They erased my name and gave me a code. K3XR9, Raynor clenched his jaw, and Kareth. "A name I chose for myself," she said quietly, "from a dream I once had. Of being free." He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just listened. And that alone was more than anyone had ever given her. The next day, she came to him with an old data chip. "This has recordings," she said, "memories from my missions." "What?" "They made me do." Raynor played the files in private. He watched as Kareth, younger and fully armored, led attacks across barren worlds. Her voice in the recordings was cold, her face unreadable, but her eyes never looked alive. Later, he found her sitting outside again. "I watched them," he said. "She didn't flinch, and we're never a monster," he replied. "You were a prisoner in armor." Kareth finally turned to face him, her voice fragile. "You think I deserve forgiveness?" "No," Raynor said honestly, "but I think you deserve a future." She stared at him for a long time, and then, for the first time, she smiled, not the smile of a warrior, but of a soul beginning to breathe. Later that week, Raynor found her in the engineering room. She was helping fix a broken drone. Her fingers moving with focus and care. The young mechanic looked nervous but grateful. Kareth didn't speak much, but her presence was no longer feared. It was becoming familiar. At night, she knocked on Raynor's door when he opened it. She held a small object wrapped in cloth. "I found this," she said, back on the battlefield. Inside was a broken human cum tag, half burned, name faded. "It belonged to someone who tried to protect a child during the raid," she said. I remembered his face. "I didn't kill him." Raynor looked at her, speechless. "He was my older brother," he finally whispered. Kareth froze, guilt flooding her eyes. "I didn't know," she said, her voice cracking. "I always remembered him." He didn't. Scream didn't beg. He just shielded her. Raynor didn't respond with anger. Instead, he walked past her, stood under the sky, and closed his eyes. "I've always wondered what his last moment was like," he said. "Now I know. He died like a hero." Kareth stepped beside him, silent, and for the first time, they stood together not as enemy and soldier, but as two souls broken by the same war. She looked at him and whispered, "I don't know if I can be fixed," he answered gently. "Maybe we don't need to fix what's broken. Maybe we just need to understand it, and under the stars." For the first time in her life, Kareth felt something new. Not victory, not survival, not orders, but a quiet hope, asterisk inside the human base. Silence no longer meant peace. It was heavy. Uncomfortable, like a storm waiting behind closed doors, whispers followed Kareth wherever she walked. Not because she was loud, but because her presence was like a shadow they couldn't erase. Captain Raynor had given her a place to stay, new uniform, and a second chance, but the rest of the base had not, to most. She was still an enemy soldier who had killed their friends, burned their homes, and fought without mercy. It didn't matter that she now helped repair defense systems, or that she saved the lives of patrols with her warnings. They didn't trust her. They didn't want her. Worst of all, they feared her one morning. Raynor entered the mess hall and saw Kareth sitting alone at the far end, her tray untouched. Her eyes low, 3 soldiers walked past her, deliberately knocking her drink to the floor. She didn't react, just bent down and cleaned the spill herself. Raynor clenched his fists. Later, He confronted the soldiers in private. "I don't care if you hate her," he said coldly, "but if you lay a hand on her, you'll answer to me, but hate doesn't." Disappear with a warning. That night, something worse happened. Kareth returned to her room and found the walls painted with slurs. Her clothes ripped apart, her bed soaked in oil. Raynor arrived just minutes later. She stood there, holding what remained of her uniform, her hands shaking not with fear, but fury. "I should leave," she said, voice cold and flat. Raynor stepped forward. "No, they don't want me here, but I do," he replied, "and they don't get to decide who deserves to be human." That sentence stunned her for the first time. Someone had called her human. Not alien, not weapon, not threat, but human. Raynor called an emergency meeting. He didn't name the attackers, though he knew exactly who they were. He looked around the room and said, "She's done more for this base than some of you ever have. She's earned her place here. If anyone disagrees, speak now." No one did. Ow. But their eyes spoke volumes, full of suspicion, fear, and buried anger. Days passed with cold silence. Raynor worried Kareth would pull away, retreat into the cold shell she once wore, but she didn't. Instead, she worked harder. She fixed faulty turrets, rewrote outdated defense codes, and even volunteered for dangerous recon analysis. Her actions spoke louder than the hate around her, but deep down, she was still alone. Then came the alert. A human patrol was ambushed beyond the canyon ridge. Communication was lost. No one knew how many had survived. Raynor was ready to go himself, but Kareth stepped in. "Let me lead the rescue," she said. "You?" A commander scoffed. "Why should we trust you not to betray us?" Kareth looked at him with steady eyes. "Because I know where they are, how the ambush was set. They used my people's Tactic 1 I designed," Raynor gave the order without hesitation. Within an hour, she was suited up, riding in a rover with 3 soldiers, who kept their guns ready not for enemies, but for her. Still, Kareth led them with focus, pointing out traps, motion sensors, and sniper positions. She saved all 3 soldiers during that mission. When they found the injured patrol, she carried one of the wounded humans back herself. Back at base, something changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, but it was real. The soldier she carried privet Lane shook her hand in front of everyone and said, "You've saved my life." Kareth looked at him like he had spoken a foreign language. Because no one had ever thanked her before, Raynor watched from the upper balcony. He didn't smile, but inside, he felt something heavy lift from his chest. Maybe, just maybe, the others were starting to see what he had seen from the beginning. Not a monster, not a threat, but someone lost in a war she never chose. That night, Raynor found her outside again. Staring up at the sky, "You could have left us to die out there," he said. Kareth nodded slowly. "I thought about it." Raynor raised an eyebrow. She smirked faintly. "But then I remembered. Someone once said I deserved a future, and I think that future starts here." He stood beside her, both of them looking at the stars. She whispered, "I don't know how to be anything other than what I was made to be," Raynor replied. "Then we'll figure it out together." And for once, Kareth didn't feel like she was in enemy territory. She felt like she belonged, even if the world hadn't realized it yet. Kareth had once begged for her life with trembling words. "Don't kill me, human. I'll warm your bed." Back then, those words had been nothing more than desperation, an offer spoken in fear. It's not truth, but now they returned to her. In a different voice, not one of fear, but one of wonder, because something inside her had started to shift. She no longer avoided Raynor. She searched for his presence, waited for him to pass by the command hall, lingered near the hangar when she knew he would check patrol schedules. She didn't understand why, but when he was around, the shadows in her chest didn't feel so heavy. One evening, power across the base flickered. A storm had rolled over the horizon, thick clouds and howling winds covering the alien sky. Raynor lit an old heater inside the communications room, the only space. With backup energy, Kareth entered without knocking. Her cloak damp from rain, her hair sticking to her face, he looked up and gestured to the heater. "Sit before you freeze." She sat quietly beside it. The warm glow casting light across her sharp features, For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Rayner broke the silence. "You've changed," he said. Kareth tilted her head. "Or maybe you're just seeing clearly now," he chuckled. "Maybe both." She glanced at him, and in her eyes was a question she didn't know how to ask. So instead, she said, "I remember everything I did during the war. I used to believe I was a sword sharp, useful and replaceable," Rayner replied. And now, she looked at her reflection in the heater's metal panel. "Now I want to be something else." Something warm. Rayner was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "I've seen you risk your life for my men. I've seen you work twice as hard for half the respect. You don't have to prove anything anymore." Kareth smiled faintly. "But I want to." That night, the rain didn't stop, and neither did the silence between them. But it was no longer empty, it was full of understanding, words they didn't need to speak. The next day, Karth brought Rayner something strange. A small, alien-shaped cube with glowing patterns. He raised an eyebrow. "Is it going to explode?" She gave him a rare smirk. "No, it's a heating core. A personal one." Rayner examined it and noticed faint scratches on its sides. "Looks old." She nodded. "It belonged to my sister. She gave it to me before our first battle." Rayner looked up surprised. "Why are you giving this to me?" Kareth's voice softened. "Because you made this place feel less like war, more like home." From that moment, things between them changed, slowly, deeply. They no longer spoke as soldier and prisoner. They shared meals, stories, and silent gazes across rooms. Sometimes Rayner would hand her a cup of tea, and their fingers would touch for just a second too long. Sometimes Kareth would sit beside him during late-night reports, reading files with quiet concentration while his heartbeat betrayed him. One night, a celebration took place inside the base. The war was officially declared over on multiple fronts. Music played from old speakers. Soldiers laughed and drank. Rayner expected Kareth to stay in her room, away from the noise and looks, but to his surprise, she entered the common hall. Wearing clean fatigues, hair tied back, and expression uncertain, as she walked past, the room fell silent. Then one soldier nodded to her, then another. No one cheered, but no one turned her away either. Kareth walked toward Rayner and asked, "Will you teach me how to dance?" He stared at her, stunned. "You want to dance?" She looked nervous. "It's part of the human peace ritual." "Yes." He laughed. Something like that. Taking her hand gently, he led her to the side. Their steps were awkward at first, but neither cared. Because in that moment, everything else faded. Rayner whispered, "You never told me what your name means." Kareth looked into his eyes. "It means warmth in an ancient dialect, and now I understand it." Later that night, Kareth stood at the balcony. Watching the stars, Rayner joined her. Holding a blanket, she accepted it without a word. Wrapping it around both of them. "I don't know how to love," she whispered. "I've never done it." Rayner smiled. "Neither have I." She leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "But I think I want to learn." And as the wind blew across the base, cold and quiet, the two of them stood there sharing warmth that had nothing to do with fire or blankets, but everything to do with hearts slowly beginning to heal. Peace, as Kareth was learning, was a fragile thing. It grew slowly, one smile, one shared moment, one gesture at a time, and just when it began to feel real, the sky reminded her it wasn't meant to last. It started with a sound no human ears could hear, a high-frequency pulse that made Kareth drop her tray in the mess hall and clutch her head. Rayner ran to her side, gripping her shoulders. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up, her face pale, voice shaking. "They're here?" Rayner narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Kareth stared toward the sky like it had betrayed her. "My people," she said. "The Empire. Within hours. Long range." Sensors confirmed it. A large alien cruiser had entered orbit. Number warning. No signal. Just presence. Panic gripped the base defenses. Were activated. Weapons charged, and commanders debated evacuation. But Rayner knew it wasn't an invasion. Not yet. It was a message. Kareth was called into the war room, where military leaders surrounded her with suspicion and questions. "Why now? Are you there, spy? Did you lead them here? She stood tall but didn't answer. Not until Rayner entered and said calmly, "Let her speak." Kareth spoke with quiet authority. "They're not here for you," she said. "They're here for me." The room went silent. She continued, "I was listed as missing in action. But they don't lose commanders easily. They want their property back." The word property made Rayner's blood boil. "You're not theirs," he said sharply. She glanced at him. Something soft in her eyes, "But they think I am?" Later, in private, Rayner confronted her. "You're not thinking of going back, are you?" Kareth didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at her hands. "Once used to destroy, now used to heal. If I stay, they'll attack this base," she said. "If I leave, they might not." Rayner stepped closer, his voice low. "You think leaving will protect us?" She looked away. "It might protect you." Rayner grabbed her arm gently. "I don't want to be protected if it means losing you." Kareth's heart ached in a way that had nothing to do with weapons or war. No one had ever wanted her to stay, not for who she was, but for who she was becoming. She pulled away just slightly. "If I fight them," she whispered, "I'm declaring myself an enemy of the Empire." Rayner nodded slowly. "Then it's time they realize you're not their weapon anymore." The next day, a transmission came from the orbiting cruiser. A high-ranking general appeared on the screen, cold, metallic voice and eyes filled with contempt. "You were programmed to obey, Kareth," he said. "You will return, or you will be reclaimed." Kareth stood beside Rayner as the entire base watched the feed. She stepped forward, looked into the camera, and said clearly, "My programming failed. I found something stronger." The general's face didn't flinch. Then, prepared to be erased, alarms blared and the countdown began. They had 1 day before the cruiser's weapons reached firing position. Rayner gathered the base's officers, preparing for a last stand, but the truth was, they didn't have enough firepower to win, and everyone knew it. Kareth walked among the soldiers, some still unsure about her. Some now loyal. She handed out equipment, gave tactical advice, and helped reinforce the weak points of the base. But her eyes kept drifting to the sky. She knew what was coming, and she knew what she had to do. That night, she visited Rayner. In the command tower, he was mapping out escape routes. But his hands paused when she entered. "I came to say goodbye," she said quietly. He stood up immediately. "No. You're not walking into their ship alone." Kareth stepped closer. "I am not walking in to surrender," she said. "I'm walking in to finish it." Rayner's eyes searched hers. "You'll die." Kareth touched his chest. Just above his heart, "I've died before when I was theirs. But if I die now, I die free." She handed him a small device. "If I don't make it back, this will send a virus into their command systems. It'll blind them for a week, enough time for you all to escape." Rayner clenched his jaw, his voice low. "I don't want escape. I want you." Kareth's voice cracked. "I never meant to stay," she whispered, "but I never wanted to leave like this." Rayner pulled her into a tight embrace, not as a captain, not as a savior, but as a man holding on to someone who had saved him in ways no one ever would understand. She pulled back, placed her forehead against his, and said, "Don't remember me as I was. Remember me for what I became, because of you, as." She turned and walked out into the stormy night. Rayner watched her disappear into the shadows, his hand clenched around the device, his heart screaming louder than the alarms, and the sky above rumbled not with thunder but with war. The base was quiet, too quiet. All systems were on standby, alarms dimmed, weapons primed. But the soldiers barely moved. They weren't just preparing for war, they were holding their breath. Captain Rayner stood at the command tower, staring. At the radar screen, Kareth's life signal had disappeared 15 minutes ago. She had entered the alien cruiser alone. With nothing but her armor, a coded virus, an unspoken hope. He felt it in his bones. Something had gone wrong. Inside the enemy vessel, Kareth moved like a ghost. She knew the halls, the codes, the faces. She was once part of them, and now she moved through them like a forgotten scar. But but every step was harder. The air was heavy. The silence full of judgment. She reached the core control room. Slipping the virus chip into a mainframe, an alert blared instantly. Guards rushed in with rifles raised. Her eyes locked with the general's as he entered. The same cold voice from the transmission. "You betrayed perfection," he hissed. "I chose something greater," she replied. "Something your systems could never process." They opened fire. Back on the base. Raynor clenched the rail of the command balcony. A pulse hit the base's sensors. The enemy ship's targeting systems glitched, blinked, then went dark. Raynor's comp crackled. "Were clear cruisers blind?" A technician shouted. Cheering began to rise. But Raynor didn't move. He looked to the sky, searching for her signal. There was none. Hours passed. Debris rained from orbit as the ship self-destructed piece by piece. The virus had worked, but Kareth didn't return. Raynor sat alone in his quarters that night. The silence louder than war. She had kept her promise not to warm his bed with fear, but to warm his life with meaning, with strength, something he never thought he'd find in a warrior bred for killing, and now she was gone, or so he thought, a week later during a border sweep. A scout team picked up a faint life signal from the canyon ridge. Barely alive, no ID tag, no uniform, just a heartbeat. Raynor drove out there himself. Against orders, he found her half buried in ash and metal, breathing, broken but alive. Kareth opened her eyes slowly. Vision blurry. The first thing she saw was him. "You came," she whispered. Raynor knelt beside her, voice shaking. "You idiot," he said with a smile. "You promised me warmth, not a heart attack." She smiled faintly. "I didn't break my promise." He held her hand. Dirt and blood smeared across both of them. "No," he whispered. "You redefined it, back at the base." Her return was met with stunned silence, but no one objected. No one dared. They had seen the sky burn for her. They had seen what she gave up for them. For him, she spent weeks recovering, wrapped in blankets, sipping strange teas. Reading human books with confusion and curiosity, Raynor visited her every night, sitting beside her, talking about everything and nothing. One night, she leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "I was never meant to live this long." Raynor smiled, then start learning how. Later, she moved into his quarters not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She slept on the left side, facing him, always touching his hand lightly before closing her eyes. Sometimes in her sleep, she whispered words in her native tongue, and Raynor would whisper back in his own, because sometimes love didn't need translation. One evening, while watching the stars, she turned to him and asked, "Do you still remember the first words I said to you?" He nodded. "Of course." She blushed slightly. "I thought I'd die the moment I said them." He laughed. "You nearly killed me with that line." Kareth smirked. So dramatic, human. He looked at her seriously. "You did warm my bed," he said softly. "But more than that. You warmed my soul." She blinked, stunned by his honesty. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like she was more than her scars, more than her past. She reached out, brushed a hand across his cheek. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she whispered. Raynor leaned closer, voice low. "No, you were supposed to live." And in that moment, under alien stars and the distant hum of a healed world, the warrior and the human once enemies. Once, strangers became something rare, not just survivors, not just lovers, but two souls who had finally learned what it meant to be free. She had once offered herself to live another day, but now she gave herself freely, not because she had to, but because she chose to. And with a soft smile, she whispered once more, "I'll still warm your bed, but now I'll stay until the stars fade."